No, there's thermal paste. There's thermal paste on it, buddy. Now, if you've looked at enough PC builds, you've probably realized that all CPU coolers are pretty much a variation on the same thing. They're a thin stack with a fan bolted to the front. So that's why I was really excited when I found this cooler by Thermaltake, which is a little bit unique. And it's called the Spin Q, or the Black Widow. I'm actually not really sure which one they want me to call it, because it says both names on the box, and yeah. That actually brings me to the packaging of the Black Q, because it is awesome. It's really dated somehow. It looks like the kind of packaging you would find an action figure in the noughties. And then it's got really weird blurbs on it. Like it's got a VR fan controller. How does that work? Does it have virtual reality controlled fans? Like I don't understand that. And then like on the side here, it's got like, it says in English, it says, "This is a computer CPU cooler. Please refer to our official website." Like they're not really giving any information there. Why do they say that on the side of the box in 10 different languages? Like it's just crazy. Now it does make sense that the packaging of the Spin Widow looks a bit dated, because it is. The cooler was first released in 2009. Now I know that makes it dated in the same way that Justin Bieber is dated, but honestly, I think the Thermal Widow aged a bit better. Because honestly, just look at that cooler. It looks amazing. And that actually brings me to the physical design of this cooler. Now this cooler has a circular fin stack where they actually put a fan in the middle blowing air out, and I think it's a really cool design idea. The way that it actually gets heat from the CPU into the fin stack is via 6 heat pipes, which means that even though the cooler doesn't weigh much at about 700 grams, it should perform quite well compared to its heavier competition. Although we'll get into that fact a bit later. Now, what's quite weird about the fan is that it's not 4-pin PWM, it just has a 3-pin fan, which means that your motherboard can't actually control the fan speed, and you have to use that VR fan control thing to actually set the fan speed. So that means that I'd probably just set it at max speed and leave it there, which honestly isn't that bad because the fan isn't that noisy. Now the fan in question is very proprietary, so it means that you can't replace it with a better performing aftermarket fan, which may or may not be an issue when we actually look at the thermals later. Now another aspect of this fan is that it does have a blue LED in it, which again is also very period specific. Like if it was a modern cooler, it would definitely be RGB, but I really like the blue LED because it's quite faint and it gives it this alien heart effect. Now let's get to the first, and I have to admit it's a fairly considerable downside of this cooler, and that's the mounting hardware that it uses. Now the mounting hardware is fairly versatile. You can mount it to pretty much any CPU you can find today, unless it's an HEDT CPU platform. So you can't mount it to like a Threadripper CPU or an LGA 2011 CPU. But again, in reasons we'll explain later, that isn't much of a problem. And you can actually mount this cooler to an AM4 CPU, but it's got some of the worst AMD mounting hardware I've ever seen. I actually had a cooler from about this period back in the day, and it had similar AMD mounting hardware, and honestly, it's a bit of a nightmare because it uses this clip that attaches to the two ends of the kind of like normal bracket that comes with the AM4 platform and with AM3 back in the day. But what that means is that it doesn't secure the cooler across 4 points. It kind of spreads the weight across 2, and then it means that the cooler kind of hinges on the CPU, and there is actually some slack involved. Now, that's a problem for 2 reasons. The first one is that it doesn't have much mounting pressure, but the other much bigger problem is the fact that it puts a lot of strain on the actual CPU socket. This is a huge problem because with the cooler in that old system that I was talking about, I put it in a car and I drove a bit of a distance with it and I forgot to take the cooler off, and the cooler actually cracked my motherboard. So that is something that you should bear in mind. If you do mount this cooler on an AM4 platform, don't move it because you may actually damage your motherboard. And the story actually gets kind of worse when you look at the Intel mounting hardware, because it uses the exact same clips that you have on the stock Intel cooler. Now, if any of you have ever used this stock Intel cooler, you'll know that it's horrendous. Now, so it's got these little plastic clips which you actually push through the CPU mounting hole in the motherboard. Now, this isn't the worst thing ever if you've got the kind of like stock Intel cooler, which isn't very big. So it means once you've pushed it through, you can fairly easily twist it and lock it into place. But if you've got a massive tower cooler in the way that's quite sharp, I have to say, it's really difficult to get in there and actually lock the clips once you've actually pushed them in. And it means that you get this kind of seesaw effect where you like push one clip in and then push the other one in, and it like pops the other one out. It really is irritating. But that's not really the worst part, because honestly, the temperatures on this cooler are really disappointing. Like I was quite hopeful when I got it, because it's a fairly beefy looking cooler, and with all of those heat pipes, you'd imagine that it performs really well. Well, I compared it against a Reven E12, which is a fairly entry-level cooler. And honestly, the Reven E12 performed quite a bit better. You were getting 3 degrees better performance on the Reven E12, so it doesn't even compare to a fairly entry-level aftermarket cooler. In fact, I actually went and looked at some reviews of this cooler when it was launched back in 2009, and it actually performed only marginally better than the stock Intel CPU cooler. Which is really horrendous. Honestly, you shouldn't buy the CPU cooler. Even though it doesn't cost very much money. You can buy it for around $35, which seems like a really good deal, but it doesn't even outperform similarly priced coolers from this generation. So that brings me to the conclusion. Yes, it's a really cool looking cooler, and it was quite a fun experience playing with it because it's so different from the normal CPU coolers that we have today. But honestly, it doesn't perform well enough to justify having it on your system, even though it does look great. And one of the problems with it is because of the proprietary fan design, you can't actually upgrade the fan to get better performance. And I honestly think that's one of the reasons why all air coolers today are designed the way they are, because, well, all of the other variations don't work as well. Now, if you like this video, do like and subscribe to the channel. Check out my Instagram and my Twitter page for more Dawid Does Tech stuff. Show your friends this video if you think they'd enjoy the ridiculous cooler. And yeah, until the next video, bye-bye.